The alarm had already gone off twice, and the house was quiet, except for the coffee maker clicking through its last cycle. Shoes sat by the door, where they had been kicked off the night before, still dusted from the parking lot at work. The calendar on the wall had not been updated in months. The day ahead looked like most others, predictable enough to move through without thinking too hard about it. That predictability had once felt like relief. The job had been steady from the beginning. The offer letter came with a salary that covered rent, groceries, insurance, and a little room to breathe. Health coverage was included. The hours were regular. There were no surprises on the paycheck. That first year, the stability felt like proof that adulthood was being handled correctly. Bills were paid on time. Nothing was overdue. Nothing was breaking all at once. Colleagues talked about how lucky it was to have something reliable. Stories floated around about layoffs at other companies. People suddenly scrambling, losing coverage, losing routine. In comparison, this place felt solid. It didn't ask for weekends. It didn't demand nights. It allowed dinners at home. It allowed sleep. Raises came slowly but consistently. A few percent here and there, always framed as recognition for steady work. The numbers on the paycheck changed just enough to notice, not enough to disrupt anything. Each increase folded smoothly into the existing budget, absorbed by rent increases, higher insurance premiums, groceries that cost a little more each year. There was never a feeling of falling behind. There was also never a feeling of moving ahead. Years stacked quietly. The furniture was replaced piece by piece as needed, never all at once. A couch lasted longer than expected. The car was paid off and kept longer than planned. Vacations stayed modest and familiar, the same places revisited because they fit within what felt reasonable. Nothing felt like a sacrifice. Everything felt like a sensible choice. The job title changed once, then again. Not dramatically, just enough to signal progress. Responsibilities expanded in small increments. A little more oversight, a little more expectation. The workload increased without ceremony. The pay adjusted accordingly, but always in the same measured way. There was no sharp line between one stage and the next. It all blurred together. Friends drifted into different paths. Some moved into roles that sounded riskier, less predictable. Their schedules became uneven. Their income stories were harder to follow. Some years they seemed ahead, other years not. Conversations about money stayed vague. No one wanted to sound careless or boastful. The steady job remained easy to explain. It made sense to everyone. At home, the household settled into rhythms built around that income. Mortgage payments fit comfortably once the down payment hurdle was cleared. The approval process had gone smoothly, supported by years of stable employment. The loan officer had nodded approvingly at the work history. It felt like validation. The house itself wasn't extravagant. It was practical. It matched the job. Maintenance costs appeared gradually. A repair here, a replacement there. They never felt catastrophic. They were absorbed, paid, moved past. The emergency fund was used exactly as intended, then slowly rebuilt. The system worked. That was the point. Performance reviews became routine. Feedback was polite, consistent, rarely surprising. There were no dramatic breakthroughs, no sudden leaps, just steady confirmation that expectations were being met. The job did not demand reinvention, it rewarded reliability. That reward was predictable. As time passed, the raises began to feel smaller, not in percentage, but in effect. Each increase landed in a landscape where everything else cost more than before. The numbers moved, but the feeling stayed the same. There was no clear moment when that realization settled in. It was more like noticing that the view outside the window hadn't changed in a long time, even though the car had been moving. The retirement account grew. Statements arrived, showing balances inching upward. Contributions increased slightly with each raise, following the same cautious pattern. It all looked responsible on paper. The charts trended upward, just not steeply. There was no sense of urgency attached to it. The future felt far away, abstract enough to remain calm about. Workdays blended together. The commute stayed the same length. The office layout barely changed. New hires came in younger, energetic, asking questions that had once felt urgent. Now they sounded familiar, already answered. Mentoring became part of the role, not officially, but naturally. It came without a corresponding shift in pay or title. It was just another layer added on. At home, expenses that had once been temporary became permanent. Childcare costs appeared and then evolved into other forms of support. School supplies replaced diapers. Activities replaced babysitters. The budget adjusted, stretched, recalibrated. The income kept up just enough to avoid strain. There was no room for dramatic changes. Everything stayed balanced. The job continued to be described as good. That word carried weight. It meant dependable. It meant benefits. It meant not worrying about sudden loss. It meant explaining to others that things were fine. That explanation became reflexive, even internal. Occasionally, there were moments of comparison. A glance at a friend's new house, larger, newer. A passing mention of a bonus structure that sounded unfamiliar. These moments didn't linger. They were easy to dismiss as different choices, different tolerances. The steady path still felt right. Years later, the idea of leaving felt heavier than it once would have. The resume listed long tenure in one place. That longevity had once been a strength. Now it felt more ambiguous. The industry had shifted quietly around the job, updating expectations, technologies, compensation norms. Inside the role, those shifts arrived slowly, filtered, diluted. Pay transparency conversations surfaced more often, usually indirectly. Articles were read, then forgotten. Numbers were mentioned in passing, then set aside. There was no confrontation with the gap between what was earned and what might have been earned elsewhere. That gap remained theoretical, unreal enough to ignore. The household finances continued to function. Bills were paid. There was food in the refrigerator. The lights stayed on. The children grew. The routines held. From the outside, nothing looked wrong. From the inside, nothing felt urgent enough to disrupt what was working. The cost showed up quietly in missed accumulation rather than loss. Savings grew, but slowly. Investment balances existed, but did not accelerate. There was no dramatic setback to point to, no single decision to regret. Just a long stretch of adequate outcomes that never compounded into something larger. Work anniversaries passed with brief acknowledgements. A card, a mention in a meeting, sometimes a small gift. The milestones marked time more than progress. They were reminders of how long things had stayed the same. Stability had stretched into permanence. The job adapted just enough to keep employees from leaving en masse. A policy update here, a perk adjustment there. Nothing transformative. Just enough to maintain the sense that staying was reasonable. That sense had been internalized long ago. At home, conversations about the future stayed general. College costs were discussed in abstract terms. Retirement was imagined as a distant phase, shaped by whatever had accumulated by then. There was no panic, no denial, just a quiet acceptance of what the numbers were. The car needed replacing eventually. The knee payment fit, but it tightened the margins slightly. Adjustments were made without much discussion. Fewer extras, fewer small indulgences. Nothing dramatic. Just subtle recalibration again. Work continued. New managers arrived with new language, but the structure remained. Performance metrics shifted slightly, but expectations stayed manageable. The job remained survivable, even comfortable. That comfort carried its own weight. Looking back, there was no clear fork in the road, where a different choice had obviously been better. Each year had made sense in isolation. Each decision aligned with responsibility, with caution, with protecting what had already been built. The cost was cumulative, not immediate. The realization didn't arrive as a sudden thought. It emerged slowly, through comparison of statements years apart, through noticing how little margin existed for change. The stability had prevented collapse. It had also limited expansion. Both were true at the same time. The job was still there. The paycheck still arrived. The house still stood. The life built around that income continued, functional and intact. Nothing demanded action. Nothing forced a reckoning. The path continued forward, as it always had, steady and unchanged.